prioritise social, affordable housing, active and passive open space, environmental sustainability, community facilities and public transport links. Mr Temporary Speaker, Mr Assistant Speaker, this motion is about how we plan for the future of the BAYS precincts, to recognise the important opportunity and to promote the fact that we need to have proper planning.
Order, there's too much audible conversation.
The BAYS precinct is located 2 kilometres from Sydney CBD and includes Blackwattle Bay, including Sydney Fish Market, Rosewell Bay, Rosewell Rail Yards, Glebe Island, White Bay Power Station and surround. It has a 5.5 kilometre length of waterfront. The precinct contains 80 hectares of land that's government owned and 94 hectares of Sydney Harbour. The precinct site is an incredible site. It's a beautiful site. It's a site that we can do so much with, and it's a site that deserves world's best planning. It was announced in July 2013 by the Premier and the Minister for Planning, who proposed it was the biggest urban renewal project in the world. It's in fact 4 times the size of Barangaroo. And whilst that is very exciting, one of the concerns that has been raised in my community is the makeup of the Board of Urban Growth. I've raised this before, my concern that the Board of Urban Growth includes a whole range of development experts, the former Managing Director of the Mirvac Group, the former Managing Director of Stocklands, and if you look at the 11 corporate and management team, every single one of them has either real estate or development background, and we're asking for some balance. That there is concern that the board and management team don't have the diversity, they don't have the breadth of experience to deliver more than just residential apartments and development. We need social and environmental experts. We need there not to be groupthink within Urban Growth New South Wales, and we don't want social factors, environmental factors being left behind. Now, the Treasurer, you might recall, Mr Assistant Speaker, announced 16,000 new dwellings for this site and then quickly withdrew that claim because the Premier and others had said it was a blank sheet. It was a sheet of paper that all of us could write on, and it was a sheet that didn't have any preconceived ideas. So again, the community was very concerned about that announcement of 16,000 dwellings because it undermined confidence in a system that hasn't seen a lot of confidence. Because if you go back to the days of Labor, during the planning process when they were in government, it was shambolic, it was lacking any strategy, and I remember myself standing in Balmain Town Hall when former Premier Yema promised to our community, he promised a master plan for White Bay, and of course it was never ever delivered. And you can understand the concern in the community about this new body that's been established, stacked with developers and their friends, a body that we want to respond to the community, not to respond just to arbitrary numbers of 16,000 dwellings. The BAYS Precinct Task Force report of 2012-13, I referred to in the motion, consulted with a huge range of people in the community, interactive website submissions, industry, community organisations, and came up with fantastic recommendations. Those recommendations, which came out of the Sydney Harbour Foreshore Authority, provided the strategic framework which was given to the New South Wales Government. And those recommendations were strongly supported by the community. In particular, public ownership aspects, to develop a planning framework and to look in great detail at each one of the individual destinations. Unfortunately, after all of that work of 18 months, this report was thrown out and Urban Growth said, well, we'll start all over again. So you can understand the community's concern, and our concern, of course, is that when it comes to urban growth, the focus on development leads to an imbalanced arrangement. And that arrangement can be seen very clearly when you look at something as simple as affordable housing. The proposal, even though it's 80 hectares, and even though there's a crying need for affordable housing and social housing, there will not be one dwelling in this entire location that is public or social housing, not one. If you look at developments around the world, big projects like this, Hunters Point, New York, 60% affordable housing. La Confluence, Leon, 48% affordable housing. Stratford City in London, 35% affordable housing. And if you look, the list goes on and on. The Kop van Zuid in Rotterdam, 30%. Hudson Yards in New York, 25%. Noordam, Copenhagen, 20%. And in Sydney, how much affordable and social housing do we get? 0. Urban Growth has already said they're not proposing any affordable or social housing, and we think that is a real problem. Another concern we have is about places for our kids to play sport. We believe it's important, of course, to have urban renewal, and what we need to do is make sure we have spaces for our kids to play sport. And the member for Drummoyne mentions Callan Park, and I supported the over $1 million that was invested by the local council in that space for more sporting fields. But the Sporting Alliance, which is a coalition of sporting clubs in our local community and the broader inner west, have got together, and their concern is that during this BAYS precinct progress, state or district sporting associations haven't been consulted, and they're concerned that the new sporting infrastructure is not being properly focused on. In particular, the growth in children between 0 and 14 years of age is above the national average. And even if only 5,000 dwellings are proposed, that means 7 new sporting fields need to be developed, which is indicative of the shortfall in the Leichhardt and City of Sydney West area over the next 20 years. So this motion today is re-emphasising the need for us to focus on community infrastructure, environmental sustainability and assets like open space and heritage, and they need to be assessed and prioritised in a financial assessment model. We call on Urban Growth to reveal the model that they're using to determine the return on investment that we, as owners of this land, as the public, deserve to understand. It's important to develop clear and measurable development objectives for the best environmental outcomes, for the best development outcomes and the best economic outcomes for this entire state. This means moving beyond motherhood principles and really focusing on detailed approaches. Now, we don't just, of course, need infill development. We need schools, we need community centres, we need the matching investment that comes with any type of urban renewal, and we want the type of economic development that means that it can be shared by all of Sydney, that it's not just $1 million apartments for those people who live on the waterfront, but it's for working people, police officers, nurses and others in the broader community. And finally, of course, schools and childcare. We know in Ultimo in particular, which is right next to the fish markets area of the BAYS precinct, huge demand for new school infrastructure. We need to be planning in an integrated way because this development is 4 times bigger than Barangaroo. It is the largest